So, sort of a little bit about me. I work in, I run something called the Science Technology Policy Academy. Uh, I spent I always like to say I started my first 5 years, I was a regular field engineer working for the state of Texas doing air pollution. I got really involved with public policy. This is all like when I was in my 20s. And I became president of the Society of Women Engineers for my town in Texas, Corpus Christi, Texas. Then I went on the state board of directors. I was at the same time working on my MBA. And like I said, this is all in my 20-ish time period. Um, and I decided, I had gone to DC about once a year for the big annual meeting at the site of the League of Women Voters. And I kind of caught what they call Potomac fever. I really got into public policy and decided that interface between engineering and public policy was really what I was interested in. So I worked about 18 years for the National Academy of Science, Engineering, Medicine, directing studies with experts on innumerable topics. Then I went to work for Congress. I worked for the Congressional Research Service, which is a think tank for Congress, working on science and technology policy. Then I worked for the White House as executive director of PCAS. That's the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology for the first 3 years of the Obama administration. Somewhere in the way, in those early years, I got my PhD, which is in policy analysis, public administration. I forgot to mention that part. And then I became a professor of the practice in engineering and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University, which is how I ended up here in Pittsburgh. And when I went independent, I decided, I kind of like being in Pittsburgh. And the reason why is that I really strongly believe that in terms of public policy these days, you can really have the most impact at the state and local level. And in fact, I'm part of a whole group of people who've been working for about 5 or 6 years to establish state science technology policy fellowship programs, just like we have at the national program with AAAS. And little by little, we've been growing. And right now, I have been working with West Virginia, and we have our first West Virginia Science Technology Policy Fellows through a grant from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. So I'm very dedicated to this. And I think this concept of having this Indiana Science Policy Day is great. I would love if we could do that in West Virginia. But, it takes one step at a time, time to get there. So let's sort of dive in. So that we're going to go through a couple of things here. So the first one is it's just sort of science and science policy communication 101. So I'm trying to, like I said, at some point I plan to write an article about this, but I really want to try to distinguish between what's often called science communication. And science communication is often more focused on explaining your science to like the general public. Or maybe to policy makers to a certain extent, but you're not really trying to focus as much on policy, per se. But explaining your science and what it is you do, and it's kind of educating about science, is different than science policy communication, or like I like to call it, science and technology policy communication. And that is because your audience is different, right? The goal is not to just have understanding, but the goal is to have action of some kind. And I find sometimes that the two get mixed together. So I think we really need to kind of begin to maybe separate the two. So this is the subject of another activity at some point in time. So what we're going to do is we're going to develop your headline pitch for what you would do. And this can be for anything, that you're trying to develop, like it might be like you're at a cocktail party, a reception, or a luncheon or something like that. And somebody asks you about your work, and you want to have some understanding. It's kind of like, think of it like kind of like a tagline, something where in just like a few words, you can describe what you do, why it's important. The policymaker pitch, those can be varying size, but I like to focus on the 30-second policymaker pitch. Because I went, when I was in DC, like I said, I was there for 30 some years. I cannot tell you, I went to innumerable receptions, right? And so you're going around, you're meeting people, there'll be actually a member of Congress there, and you go over there and you shake their hand, and they say, well, what it is you work on? And I say, oh, well, I work for the National Academy of Sciences, and I'm doing a study on risk assessment at the Environmental Protection Agency. But at the same time that I'm doing this, the member of Congress, is looking over my shoulder, said, oh, is there somebody more interesting than this person talking about this geeky concept, right? Or somebody else comes in and also wants to talk to the member of Congress. So at the most, you probably have about 30 seconds to kind of get the attention of the policymaker. And the ultimate goal is hopefully, do you have a staffer that I could talk to about this at some point to try to get that connection? So you want sort of something to happen, or can I send you some material about this, or something that you will do? And you can do this, in your hometown. There's always, like Meet Your Member Congress Days, particularly around this season when everybody's running for re-election. You can go up, you can ask a question at an open mic session, where you can do things. So this is really kind of the season where you can really connect and talk to, your member of Congress, your state legislator, whoever it is you want to reach in your hometown, your home area, because they sort of come to you. It's actually a lot easier to meet them, as they call it, in the district or wherever it is they're at, than it is in DC or in your state capital, unless, of course, you have an event planned, for that reason. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's go to the first part here. So science technology policy really falls into two categories. And so what I want you to do as I go through this, I want you to think about what it is you're interested in. And there's no judgment here. It's whatever you want to do. But when I'm done with this, I'm going to ask you to type into chat, are you interested in policy for S&T or S&T for policy? So policy for S&T, policy for science technology, is focused on how policymakers manage and fund science, technology, engineering, and mathematics research. And it also includes STEM education, and that is at all levels, from K through 12 all the way through graduate education, even like postdoc, which is supposed to be an educational experience, and workforce, and the relationship of that with workforce development. Okay, so think, okay, is that what I'm interested in? So either it's what you do or what you're interested in someday. Right? And then S&T for policy is taking your knowledge and your expertise to help policymakers develop evidence-based policies that enhance society and solve problems. As I say here, sort of in simple terms, it's about how government supports science and technology and how they use science technology to make better decisions. Now, oftentimes, particularly when you're working with disciplinary societies, they're going to focus on that first one, policy for S&T. So they want you to go to, whether it's your state Capitol Hill or your at the national Capitol Hill, and say, hey, here's my research. It's important. Please give us money, because that's the battle every year, which is over the budget. When it's S&T for policy, it's usually much more focused, right? Because not everybody cares about a particular issue. And by that, I mean the policymakers care about a particular issue. So when you approach them, it's a very different perspective, because a lot of people say, okay, like Debbie, like why is it different? And the difference is that in the first place, you are competing with many, many other topics for funding. And even within the science and technology world, there's competition for how much goes to different agencies. And just think about, say, the Department of Energy. There's a section which is on energy efficiency and renewable energy. Okay, well, how much should go to wind power? How much to solar? How much to energy efficiency? How much to nuclear, right? How much to geothermal, right? So you are asking for something. And so you are like any other constituent who's asking to them, and they have to decide, okay, well, how much priority is this for me? But when you're doing S&T for policy, you are helping them make a decision, right? Or helping them, get more information and more data for an issue that they might care about. So it might be, environmental issues, it might be energy issues, it might be things related to health, but it's about a societal problem. And that is how you're trying to help them. So let's take a second here, and I want everybody type in chat. What do you think, like, you're interested in? You know, are you interested in policy for S&T and S&T for policy? Again, there's no good or bad here. It's just usually one or the other. Sometimes it's both. Okay, but for today, let's just kind of pick the one we care about the most. Okay. So we got a lot of S&Ts for policy here. Oh, there we go. Now, I myself have done both. I've done policy for S&T. For example, I worked on a report called Reshaping the Graduate Education of Scientists and Engineers. I was at the National Academies. And then I've also done S&T for policy. My personal preference, as you probably can tell from my internal bias here, is S&T for policy. And I sort of think in my mind, we could do a better job showing S&T for policy if we want more money as in policy for S&T. Okay, so this is kind of like just a bit more distinguished thing. This is, by the way, from my book, which is hopefully coming out sometime next month as sort of a pre-publication thing. So if you want to get a free copy of it, be sure to sign my newsletter, which is at the end of this presentation, but I got to mention it now before, because I'll forget later. Okay, so here's examples of what questions you might have. So the first one is, how much public funding should support climate change research, and how should policymakers prioritize that research funding? And that is, if you see up here, public policy influencing science technology, or briefly policy for science. And then here we have as an example, use of scientific information to understand the impacts of climate change and develop policies to adapt to that change, okay? And that is science technology informing public policy. And you'll see the same things here below for technology. Like I said, since I'm an engineer, I always feel that we are treated as second-class citizens. And so I always like to emphasize that. So we have how much public versus private funding should support research into self-driving cars. And then how should self-driving cars be regulated to protect public safety? And, you know, when you look at these, you know, you can sort of see how, I think, how different these topics are. So the next thing I want you to think about is what your view is of science and society. Okay, so as I kind of go through these, what I want you to think about is not just only yourself, which I'm going to ask you obviously what you think you are, but also the people around you, the people in the science and technology community with whom you interact. So the first is sort of the pure scientist, okay? And that is somebody who says, look, my job as a scientist is to work in my lab, produce research papers, you know, get funding, you know, for that research, write proposals. That's what I do. That's what I'm good at. That's what I want to stick to. And that's what I am. I'm a pure scientist. Don't bug me with this policy stuff. Okay. The second is the issue advocate. Okay, so this can vary. It can be very extreme. The example I like to give at the moment is that there's the COP meeting, which is a big climate change meeting. They have a global meeting every year. So during that event, there were scientists who chained themselves to like banks because they were objecting to the funding that was given to like fossil fuels. Okay, so sometimes scientists can really go to the extremes. So there's can be extremes at both sides, but of course, some people are just kind of in the middle. So these people are advocates. They strongly believe that action should be taken. And sometimes this is not even on topics that they work on, you know, like climate change. It might be, I don't know, a biologist or something. And that's not what their research is on, but they feel passionately about science and the importance of science in decision making. A science arbiter is somebody who kind of brings scientists together and experts to develop a consensus. So the very first study that I worked on, as I say, when I was a baby engineer, was on mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. Again, this was when I was sort of like in my late 20s. I was working for the National Academy of Sciences at the time. And so I work with about 20 experts to figure out, okay, out of the million different ways to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, what makes the most sense? What is the highest priority, right? And that took consensus. That took a lot of people working together to figure out how to make that sense. And the next one is what I consider myself to be is the honest broker of policy alternatives. And so sometimes this is called truth to power, in the sense that a policymaker may come to me and they say, you know, like, Debbie, electric vehicles are the answer, you know, and we really need to invest in them. So I want you to do an analysis to figure out how much greenhouse gas emissions we can reduce if we switch to electric vehicles. And then I might have to go back to that person and say, I'm so sorry, policymaker. It is true that in some places, like for example, some place that has primarily hydropower, like in Canada, there's a part of Canada that has almost entirely hydropower research, electric vehicles are better than gasoline vehicles for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, okay? But where we live in Pennsylvania, most of our energy is still from fossil fuels. And so therefore the electricity that is generated is also, that is used in our electric vehicles, is also from fossil fuels. So as it turns out, we might be better off not with an electric vehicle, but with a hybrid vehicle instead. And that at this point is what you should promote as opposed to an electric vehicle. Now, someday, you know, we might have that electricity mix that would say, hey, an all electric fleet makes sense, but not necessarily in reality. Okay. And so I might have to break the news to somebody. And, you know, they're the policymaker, they can make their decision. And, but, you know, it's one of these things, there's a lot of nuances to the issue. And that's what my job is. My job is to get to those nuances so that they make the best decision for society, not necessarily the decision that fits with their own personal biases based on something they read in the newspaper. Okay, so what do you guys think you are? Yeah, type it in the chat, please. Yeah. And I noticed somebody who talked about the most, the Missouri Policy Initiative, so that's part of the team and so forth that I've been working with. There are right now, for those of you interested in state policy programs, and you can see this in like, I think the opportunity section on my webpage, you can apply right now for programs in California, New Jersey, Idaho. Those are the ones I remember. So if you're interested in that, be sure to take a look at this program, because there's only a particular season where they take applications. California, I forgot California. Okay, it looks like, yeah. So I see Emma, like you put pure scientist now hoping to be an honest worker later. I hear that a lot. People say like I'm one thing now, but I'd like to be something else in the future. That's fine. It's just good for you to think about where you fit within the science and policy spectrum. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. There's just, you know, different kinds of things. Okay. So the other thing you want to think about is what is it that you want to communicate to the policymaker? Are you trying to be descriptive, saying like, okay, this is what is happening now, right? And so you're trying to collect data, say, okay, here's what's happening with, what's the one, what's that called? The algae that's clogging up all our lakes and things like that. I'm trying to remember the name, algae blooms, something like that. Harmful algae blooms. I think that's it. Yeah. So thank you. Somebody's nodding, tell me that's right. I've had several students who've done topics on that. And so therefore I know more about it than I probably should. Sometimes you want to be evaluative. You want to figure out like what's working or alternatively what's not working. And sometimes you're being prescriptive. You want to say, okay, here's what I think should be done next. So one thing you want to think about is what is your goal in terms of, yeah, are you just trying to explain how something works? Are you trying to figure out how it works? Are you trying to think what should be done next? So again, just something to think about. Why don't you just type in chat which you think you're interested in, descriptive, evaluative, or prescriptive? or maybe some combination thereof. Okay. Okay, so good. I sort of see some things here. So again, just something to kind of think about. Okay, so any questions before we go on to the next section? Let me go back to this so people can look at it. About science for policy, policy for science, and just use the raise hand option, by the way, if you have a question. And you can interrupt me at any time, but I will stop occasionally. Okay. So let's go to developing your headline pitch. Okay, so I'm going to share this video with you. Now, this is somebody, I think they're doing a pretty good job in sort of in that descriptive kind of category. So see what you guys think. Oh, I should mention, this is from the show called West Wing. Okay, so West Wing, you guys probably never watched it live because it was about 25 years ago, but it was about, oh yeah, so good. I have some West Wing fans here. So West Wing was about kind of like what many of us would think of to be the ideal White House. It was headed by a Nobel Prize winner in economics, and it had lots of interesting people. The most important thing, and the reason why West Wing stands up still today, and I recommend people watch it, particularly the first couple of seasons, particularly if you want to understand politics as opposed to policy. I do policy, I don't do politics. I watch others to get expertise on politics. And so anyhow, it is because they had advisors who really worked in the West Wing and during primarily the Clinton administration. And having watched it off and on, just, like binging it over the decades since it's been out, I can tell you that it holds up amazingly well. And you will be surprised, I think, sometimes about how much history repeats itself. Because you think, that thing, that hurricane thing, that just happened like last week, right? And to me, it's somewhat amazing. So they have a couple episodes that are really good about sciencey kinds of stuff. This is one of them. This is what's called Block of Cheese Day. So this goes back to President Jackson. And this is when you could just like wander in the White House, and there's Block of Cheese Day, and there would be big cheese where people would wait in line to see the president and their staff. And you could eat some of the cheese while you were waiting for your turn to pitch your idea to the policymakers. Okay, so that's what these people are doing. So, okay, so let me hit share. I don't know why it's out.
Hi, I'm sorry.
Hello.
Sorry to be late.
Not a problem.
I'm C.J. Craig.
Of course you are. I'm Dr. John Fallow. This is Dr. Cynthia Sales and Professor Donald Huke.
Huke?
Huke.
Okay, and you are the Organization of Cartographers for Social Equality.
Well, we're from the OCSE. We have many members.
How many?
4,300 dues-paying members.
What are the dues?
$20 a year for the newsletter.
Let's start.
Wait, I want to see this.
This is Josh Lyman.
Indeed you are.
Josh, this is Dr. Fallow, and
Hi.
his merry men.
Yes.
Should we begin?
Yes. Plain and simple, we'd like President Bartlett to aggressively support legislation that would make it mandatory for every public school in America to teach geography using the Peters projection map instead of the traditional Mercator.
Give me $200 and it's done. Really?
No. Why are we changing maps?
Because, CJ, the Mercator projection has fostered European imperialist attitudes for centuries and created an ethnic bias against the Third World.
Really?
The German cartographer, Mercator, originally designed this map in 1569 as a navigational tool for European sailors.
The map enlarges areas at the poles to create straight lines of constant bearing or geographic direction.
So it makes it easier to cross an ocean.
But
Yes.
it distorts the relative size of nations and continents.
Are you saying the map is wrong?
Oh dear, yes. Look at Greenland.
Okay.
Now look at Africa.
Okay.
The two land masses appear to be roughly the same size.
Yes.
Would it blow your mind if I told you that Africa is in reality 14 times larger?
Yes?
Here we have Europe, drawn considerably larger than South America. When it's 6.9 million square miles, South America is almost double the size of Europe's 3.8 million.
Alaska appears 3 times as large as Mexico, when Mexico is larger by 0.1 million square miles.
Germany appears in the middle of the map when it's in the northernmost quarter of the Earth.
Wait. Relative size is one thing, but you're telling me that Germany isn't where we think it is?
Nothing's where you think it is.
Where is it?
I'm glad you asked. The Peters projection.
It has fidelity of axis.
Fidelity of position.
East-west lines are parallel and intersect north-south axes at right angles.
What the hell is that?
It's where you've been living this whole time. Should we continue?
Uh-huh.
So, you're probably wondering what all of this has to do with social equality.
No, I'm wondering where France really is.
Guys, we want to thank you very much for coming in.
Hang on, we're gonna finish this.
Okay.
What do maps have to do with social equality, you ask?
She asked.
Salvatore Natoli of the National Council for Social Studies argues, in our society, we unconsciously equate size with importance and even power.
I'm going to check in on Tubman.
Go.
These guys find Brigadoon on that map, you'll call me, right?
Probably not.
Okay.
When third world countries are misrepresented, they're likely to be valued less. When Mercator maps exaggerate the importance of Western civilization, when the top of the map is given to the Northern Hemisphere and the bottom is given to the Southern, then people will tend to adopt top and bottom attitudes.
But wait, where else could you put the Northern Hemisphere but on the top?
On the bottom.
How?
Like this.
Yeah, but you can't do that.
Why not?
Because it's freaking me out.
Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that little interlude. What I want you to notice too is that they had at the very beginning, they had which I'm going to talk about shortly, which is bottom line up front, right? So at the very, very beginning, if you listen to this video, and like I said, you guys now have the slide deck, so you can go back and do it. They said, we want President Bartlett, okay, to make it a law that everybody is this new mapping system instead of the old mapping system, right? Now just think of the hullabaloo that we had with Pluto, right? Imagine that. But on the other hand, the scientists are right. I mean, so I think they made a pretty good pitch. You know, it wasn't long, you know, just a couple of minutes, but it was enough to intrigue somebody and make them think, right? And that's what you know, what it is that you want to do. And it's based on research, right? Okay, so, let me go here. Okay, so here's some sort of general things you want to think about as you sort of develop your headline. So the first is you want to focus on the societal goal, right? I don't care if your research is on quantum physics, right? Still, believe it or not, there is out there, because somebody asked me this, somebody, the student that I was talking to, and he said, well, how can I relate like my PhD dissertation research on quantum physics to society? And I said, well, look, if you look, there's actually things out there that are workforce driven right now, today, in a couple of states that are focused on the quantum workforce and the generation of that, right? And so it is, you know, it is possible, you know, to do these things, but sometimes you just have to think a little bit and try to reach that ultimate thing, you know, what it is that you're trying to do. The second thing is geography matters in public policy, right? So if you're talking with people in Indiana, then they want to know how this affects Indiana, right? They don't really care what's happening over here in Pittsburgh, in my neck of the woods, right? So somehow you have to relate what it is you're doing to something that matters to that policymaker. And the other thing is that when you actually do policy analysis, like for example, the discussion I was talking earlier about electric vehicles, right? So electric vehicles make sense in Ontario, Canada, where there's hydropower, but they don't necessarily make sense here in Pittsburgh, right? Solar panels on every house make sense in Arizona, but they don't necessarily make sense, again, here in Pittsburgh, right? In our case, we have a lot of old housing, and actually, I was actually talking to an architect, a professor of architecture. He's doing the architecture school at Carnegie Mellon, and he said, in reality, because so many of the houses in Pittsburgh were built during the cold days, they have no insulation. And so if you really want to save energy, don't put solar panels on your house. Instead, put in insulation, because that is where you really save energy and you'll be warmer. Okay, so geography matters. The other thing is to keep in mind that writing as an advocate is different than writing as a neutral analyst. Okay, so when you're writing as an advocate, you will focus only on the pros. You will not focus on the cons. Okay. Now, what I'm going to teach you is how to focus on being a neutral analyst. And what I also tell people is that even if you're an advocate, you still need to understand the other side. So it's worthwhile doing this analysis, because I can promise you the first thing you're going to do that's going to happen is that somebody's going to say, oh, but I had people just before you who said that we shouldn't do this for that reason. What's your response to that, right? So you always have to at least be prepared. It's kind of like that, opposition research that they talk about in politics. Okay, so then you want to think about, what is a policymaker you want to inform or influence? What do they want to know? Not what you want them to know, but what do they want to know? And we're going to get into a little bit more about this later. And then this goes to that bottom line up front that I was talking about. As scientists, we're taught you start with your background, you have your methods, and then you have your results. But everybody else, whether it be a policymaker or you yourself for things other than science, you want it the opposite way. You want to know the results first, and then the so what, and then you want the background, right? So if you're trying to fix a sink, all you want to know is how to fix a sink. You don't want to know how the sink operates, right? Yes, go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, just a question. So my research is on a disease that no one knows about. So how do you balance giving enough background so that people actually know what your results are? And maybe that ties into, what do you want your audience to know? But for me, I feel like I always need to give some background in order to get anywhere.
Yeah. So what the key is to limit it to just a few words. Okay. So I was actually, just to give you an example, I work with faculty who are interested in linking their research to policymakers. Okay. So I'm working with one at West Virginia University. I do a lot of work in West Virginia, so I mention it a lot. And she's working on rare diseases. Okay. And so I said, what is a rare disease? And in my mind, right, a rare disease was something that only a few people had. But then she said, oh, well, it's things like kidneys, like people who need dialysis. And I thought, oh, that's like a lot of people, right? So it might be like a rare disease in that world, but it's not like things, I mean, it's something I've heard of, right? I know people who have kidney problems, need dialysis, and I know about sickle cell anemia, and I know, these are things that we sort of know about, right? And so the key is for you to find something that can explain this rare thing that you're talking about, and something that people can understand. Because when she was using the word rare diseases, I was totally clueless, right? I was doing something else the other day, and what was this? Oh, I remember. I was with the Canadian. So I've been doing a lot of talks in Canada. So I was doing one last week, and the person was talking about, I don't know, something related to leverage forestry or something. I said, I have absolutely no idea what that means. See, I'm honest. I will say I have absolutely no idea what it means. Okay. But a policymaker, or somebody else you're trying to explain it to, they might just try to say, oh, like, I probably don't care. But I said, and he said, well, everybody should know what that means. I said, no, nobody knows what that means. And so out of the 50 or so people in the audience, they'd already gone, all of them had done brief descriptions of what they did. I said, how many of you, and all of whom were working for the same agency as this person, how many of you knew what this term was? And about 25%, a fourth, knew what it was, right? So you don't have to go do a big, long-winded explanation. Just come up with something small, like rare diseases, like sickle cell anemia. Oh yeah, I know that. Okay. Okay, so anybody else have questions while we're on this topic? Okay, so just think, like, when you are online, right, and you're on Google, and or you're looking at a real paper newspaper, which I don't know if anybody reads anymore, or you're just looking at the headlines, right? You want to see the headline first. You don't want to like go to the conclusion at the bottom of the article. You may never reach the bottom of the article, right? You're looking at the headlines. You're looking at how to fix a sink on some video. You do whatever it is. You want the bottom line, and Google makes it so easy for me now. Now, when I type in, how do I fix a clogged sink? Okay, it even goes me to the point in the video. So I don't have to listen to all the rambling things that they often do in these videos, right? And so we're like everybody else, right? But when you're in scientist mode, you think, oh, I have to get the background first. But no, start with the results first. And then if you get their attention, then you can go further. Okay. Okay. Oh yeah. So we have sort of fun tangent. Okay. I'm sorry. We'll have to wait to the fun tangent in a second, but I would like to hear it. Okay. So here's sort of 8 steps to developing your bottom line up front headline. So the first is you need to understand your core message, and that's what we're going to work on next. Is what is it that you want somebody to understand in, like 5 to 10 words, and 10 is really pushing it. Okay. You want to be aware of your audience. It's going to be different if you're talking again to a policymaker in Indiana, or who's at the state level, or a policymaker who represents Indiana in the Senate, or one who represents Indiana in the House. Okay, not to mention somebody in Ohio next door, or if you're talking to people at the K through 12 level, if you're talking to professionals, if you're talking to the Rotary Club, all those have different audiences. Like I said, I've had presentation mania this week, and I'm not telling you guys exactly the same thing as I told the folks in Canada, right? That wouldn't make any sense. You want to have sort of clarity and precision. You want to be concise. You want to focus on accuracy, not sensationalizing. And so that's something you have to be careful about. You want to make sure you get in there the potential subtle impact, even if it might be decades away. You're going to have, it's going to take some work. You're going to have to iterate and refine your pitch. And then also you need peer feedback. And this is not just in this particular thing, but like when I worked at the Congressional Research Service, and I would write anything from an email to a short memo to a 30-page report. There were 4 levels of review. 3 of them were by my colleagues, people at the same level as myself. And they would go over it sentence by sentence. It came back, and I was pretty senior at this point, kind of like the dripping in with red thing, because every word makes a difference. Then it would go to the head of my section, which was in science and technology. Then it would go to the head of my division, which is called resources, science, and industry. And then it would go to a review office. And then it would go to the policymaker. And all that could happen in minutes, in hours, in the same day, right? that's how important peer review is in public policy. Because everybody has a different experience, everybody has a different perspective. And so you need to incorporate that. Okay, so what I did is I always like to focus on like whatever region of the world that I'm talking to. And so I said, well, what's happening in Indiana? You know, I'm not even sure if I've been to Indiana. I think I maybe drove through Indianapolis one time, but that's maybe as much as I've done. And it turns out, of course, you guys are in session. And so the big issue in Indiana, interestingly, both this session and last session, is reading skills in Indiana. I don't know if you guys know this or not, because I know you're busy with, you know, like your studies, and you may or may not be from Indiana, but it turns out that people are really worried about third grade reading scores. So here it is. The number of Indiana students who cannot read by the end of third grade has doubled since 2012. So that's like a big deal. Like it's getting worse. It's not getting better, right? And also retention rates for the students have been dropping and so forth. So last year, it turns out, interesting, I found out that Indiana does a budget for 2 years, which is like so much better than Congress, right? So like last year was a budget year. This year is a year where they actually like talk about issues, okay? So they passed something last year, you know, related to this. But notice that this is Senate Bill 1. Okay, so I know at the national level, Senate Bill 1 means that is the #1 priority, when that number means something in this session. So anyhow, I thought this was, you know, pretty interesting. And then you'll see here that this headline here, 1 in 5, so that's 20%, right? Of third graders will need additional support to build their reading skills based on these test results. So that's a lot of people, right? That's a lot of kids. Okay, so what this bill would do is it would basically say, if you are a third grader and you do not pass reading, then you do not get to go to the 4th grade. Now that's like a big deal, right? That's like a really big deal. And the governor, you know, supports it and so forth. And oh, well, okay. So then for this next article here, okay, and this is from the NAACP, okay, and it points out that that there's a study from someplace called the Education Trust that said grade level retention, which I guess means holding kids back a year, leads to more incidents of bullying and victims of bullying, that people, students of color are more likely to be held back. And there's also lower expectations of students of color. And it disproportionately affects the low income students and the student of color, right? So again, this is like a big deal. It also means that there's larger class sizes, so that can have a negative learning impact on students, particularly those who have more needs. And so what they're saying, that the person who's head of the NAACP in Indiana, that students with the greatest challenges, academic, socially, emotionally, developmentally, need additional support and early interventions, not punitive measures that have been shown to increase dropout rates on top of worsening student behavioral problems, and leading to mental health issues and stuff like that. So this is like, oh, like, wow, but there is a problem, right? I mean, it's sort of like, this is a challenge, right? So you have 20% of the kids who are not able to pass reading, but then if you hold them back, then bad things will happen too. So there's like no really good way to do this. So, what I did is I put these into all these 3 articles that I mentioned. I put them into ChatGPT, which is a tool that I have here. And it says that, and I asked it to come up with a title for this which would be relatively a neutral title. So, which is, and this is like what you guys are want to come up with, which is retention or remediation, third grade reading standards in Indiana. So pretty neutral title, but getting across the issue. And then the pros are early intervention can identify students who need help, and raise academic standards can lead to better long-term academic and career outcomes. The cons are potential stigmatization of those from disadvantaged backgrounds that can affect their self-esteem and attitudes toward learning. And there's also the resource strain because of the larger class sizes. You might need additional teachers, support staff to handle these interventions. Okay. And then, so then I said, okay, well, so that was, I should go back and say, okay, this is science for policy, right? I should have asked you that, but hopefully that's pretty evident that this is what this is. Okay, so then I said, okay, let's make this a policy for science question. And it came up with this. So it came up with this title, which is Data-Driven Literacy, How Research Could Shape Indiana's Educational Future. And so the pros are that if you invested in more research, you'd have evidence-based strategies, and you'd avoid negative consequences, in terms of what would occur. But the cons is that it would delay help from struggling students because of the time necessary to do the research. And it would like individual student analysis because you're looking at large populations, right? And so how much, can, just like the test itself, how much can research really help like a case-by-case study, right? So these are sort of the pros and cons of investment in this area, and it collected all that from those articles that I mentioned earlier. And so this is your breakout session that we're going to go into here. So what I want you to do is for your topic, which I understand you come with a topic, or if not, you can share somebody else's topic. I want you to develop that short, snappy headline and at least one con and one pro bullet. And so I gave you, like I said, I use ChatGPT every day because I work on my own and I really need somebody to bounce ideas off of. It doesn't mean that I trust ChatGPT or it's perfect all the time, but I will also say it picks up things that I miss, right? Particularly, I find it really helps students. And when I say students, by the way, I mean everybody from high school up to very senior people, because those are my range of people that I teach. People sometimes have a really hard time thinking about cons for whatever issue it is that they care about. But there are always pros, there are always cons. And ChatGPT, I think, helps you kind of recognize those. Now, if you were doing this for a real analysis, I would say get citations and so forth. But this is what you can do. So here's what you can do if you want to use, you can do this on your own. You don't have to use ChatGPT, but if you want to, that's also good. So you want to summarize some sort of background information in 3 bullets. So one, you can, for example, copy in an abstract if you're trying to do your research. You can link to a document that has your research, but like I said, I found sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't work. I never quite know. It's gotten better. ChatGPT has gotten a lot better over the past, like from month to month, it gets better. That's all I can say. But sometimes things work. Sometimes they give you something, like I'll say, what's the source for that? And they'll give you sources. And sometimes they'll say, oh, I don't do that. That's too hard for me. In fact, I've totally stopped using Bard, which is the Google version, because it always says, I can't do what it is you want. But ChatGPT, does pretty good. Okay, so whatever your topic is, take some text that you have, either paste it in or something, and ask it to summarize it. You can do it, say, without jargon or in easy to understand language. With ChatGPT, you have to be very specific. with that. And what comes out won't be perfect, but it will be something probably that you can modify. Same thing here. So then I would say like provide 10 newspaper headline options. Out of the 10, I've over time, I used to say provide a newspaper headline. The first one never worked for me. Then I said 5, and then I started to use 10. And out of the 10, usually I'll find 2 that are pretty close. And sometimes I synthesize them together for what it is that I want. But it is always a good starting point. And then you put using this title. So you can take the title that you came from, the one that you picked, and you paste that in where I say from previous step, develop 4 bullet points with 2 cons and 2 pros on this topic. And if you do that, then you'll develop like what I have back here. Okay. So then I want you to share whatever you come up with the other people in your breakout room. Okay. So looks pretty much everybody's back. Okay, so while I'm talking, please type in just your headline into chat. I would also be interested in knowing if you decide to use ChatGPT, and if so, what did you think of it? Was it like, this like is not going to work at all for me, or, you know, it kind of helped give me a different view of the world. And I will look at these kind of as they come in. And are there any questions, cries of outrage or misfortune? I can't believe that I'm expected to get down to a headline about my work. Okay, good. So can you do user reaction and say thumbs up if you found this interesting, or thumbs down if you thought it was a waste of time? Okay, I see some thumbs up. Good, good. That's what I like to see. Oh, and hey, I like this in quantum workforce. Hey, somebody was listening to me. Okay, as I just see these things sort of flash by. Okay, so now we're going to move on. So let me go to sharing my screen again here. And so forth. And if you, in case you were late arrival, I did put in my slide deck link again in case you missed it because you were a bit late or something. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go from our headline to our policy maker pitch. Okay, and so now I'm going to tell you the secret ingredient, which I call the 4 E's. Now, although I call them the 4 E's, they are based on academic literature and things that I learned in PhD school. But I have learned, because I have literally been teaching this stuff for decades, and as you can tell, I'm very passionate about it, that thinking about it in this framework, this 4E framework, works the best for scientists and engineers who are trying to explain their work. If you're a political scientist, you're going to learn like a whole heck of a lot more stuff. But for us, if you stick to these 4 E's, then this will work for you. So the first is effectiveness. So that's a degree to which the societal goal is more likely to be reached when you're thinking about that policy. And this is something that you're most common with. And I would say almost all researchers, they will be able to answer something related on effectiveness, but they don't get into the other 3 E's. And so that is really the difference between having a science mindset and a policy mindset. Okay. So the next one is efficiency. And efficiency, what you want to do is what will get you the best bang for the societal buck. Okay. So it's basically the cost of implementing that policy relative to its benefit, relative to its effectiveness in society. The next thing is equity, which is the fairness of the policy, like who are the winners, who are the losers, and then ease of acceptability. And that doesn't really mean as much politicians, but the degree to which the policy is opposed or supported by key stakeholders. and how likely the policy is to move forward in that political arena. So when you're a policymaker, you want to think about all four of these things, right? And so if you are somebody who's sort of coming to them with a pitch, whether it's policy for science or science for policy, this is what they're trying to think about. So it's really good to prepare ahead of time and sort of think these things through. So you might say, hey, really? But I would challenge you for the decisions you make. Like, for example, where you go to college and what kind of car you buy, and whether or not like when you graduate from college, what it is that you're going to do as an occupation. You're going to look at all of these things, right? Now, it might be personal goals as opposed to societal goals, but it'll still be the same thing. Like when you think about college, don't you think about how much it costs me? At the PhD level, maybe it's a little bit different, because oftentimes you're supported, but at the bachelor's degree level, I know like I was offered places, I don't know, in 10 different colleges, right? And some of them gave me scholarships, some of them didn't. My daughter, who's now 25, we looked at all those different things. Looked at how far she was away from home. We looked at, okay, like sometimes you have easy acceptability. Maybe your parents every year, they both went to Notre Dame, and so therefore you are expected to go to Notre Dame. And so if you said, oh, I want to go to Michigan instead of Notre Dame, then living with your parents would like be awful, right? So these are things that we all think about for our own policies, our own decisions. And policymakers are not really any different. Okay, so here's our friend. Again, I forgot to introduce her. Her name is CJ Craig, and she is the press secretary for the White House. And the person you met earlier, his name was Josh Lyman. He was deputy chief of staff. Okay, so when I play this video, what I want you to do is think about those 4 E's. Again, these are the 4 E's, okay? And think about the questions that she asked of these scientists who are trying to convince her that something is worth pursuing. So let's see here.
Jay, we'd like to tell you the story of Pluie.
Who's Pluie?
I'm glad you asked.
That's Pluie.
Yes.
Pluie's a wolf?
Yeah, she is.
And you're going to tell me her story?
Jerry.
For 4 years, scientists have tracked Pluie as she made her way from Banff National Park in Alberta up and down the Rockies. In that time, she's made 3 round trips between Canada and Wyoming, covering 40,000 square miles.
We think you'll admit it was a pretty impressive performance for Pluie, especially when you consider the impediments of modern life she had to conquer. Highways, housing, forests denuded of trees.
Not to mention the U.S.-Canadian border.
Sure, because no photo ID.
I'm sorry?
That was a joke.
Why does Pluie make the trek? Because wolves have to breed with many packs in order to keep from becoming extinct.
Really?
If they breed among themselves, they'll eventually produce offspring that's genetically weaker, thus endangering their long-term survival.
That helps explain Buckingham Palace.
May we tell you what we propose?
Sure.
The wolves-only roadway.
The wolves-only roadway?
1,800 miles from Yellowstone to the Yukon Territory, complete with highway overpasses and no cattle grazing.
An 1,800-mile wolves-only roadway?
Pluie, you'll recall, had to...
Hang on. How are you going to teach wolves to follow road signs?
Our scientists are working on a plan.
Yeah, but in the meantime, Pluie's going to get drunk and wander off the wolves-only road and end up eating my cat.
We don't think that'll happen.
I don't think this is going to happen.
Perhaps we should...
First of all, ranchers don't want wolves returned to the West.
Ranchers are killers.
No, they're not. And anyone who says it should take it back. Ranchers face the following conditions: falling stock prices, rising taxes, prolonged drought, and a country that's eating less beef. Ranchers want to blame something, and because they're ranchers, they want to fight something. I'd rather it be a wolf than us, so unless Pluie registers to vote...
Pluie was shot and killed by a rancher in British Columbia last month.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm not sure you are.
Just out of curiosity, how much would it cost?
That's the beauty part. With contributions and corporate sponsorship, the cost to the taxpayer is only $900 million.
No, seriously, how much would it cost?
CJ, if we're gonna do this, why not do it right?
We're not gonna do it.
Well, sure, there are other things we could spend the money on.
You think?
I'd like to hear what you think. What's a better way to spend this money?
$900 million?
Another warplane? Another SNL bailout?
How about we build the 9 best schools in the world?
Let's move on to the grizzly bear. Jay,
Okay.
I'd like to tell you the
Oh,
story
sorry.
of
Stop. Okay, so I'd like to hear from some folks, either in chat or just raise your hand. What's something related to effectiveness that CJ talked about?
She mentioned that the wolves might, well, if they're not going to follow the road themselves, right? They're not dogs. You can't train them to actually stay within the guidelines that you provide.
That's correct. Following road signs, right? Somehow wolves cannot do that. So would it really be effective? Okay. Let's hear something on efficiency. That's getting the best bang for the societal buck. Okay.
She said, how about instead of spending that on a road for wolves, we use it on the 9 best schools in the nation. So catering towards a different goal.
Yes. Yes. So basically, it is, sorry, my dog over here is objecting to Fluid the Wolf, I think. But yes, so when you think, when you're the White House, you think best bang for societal buck in a big picture kind of way, right? So you're in charge of the whole federal budget. And when you think about $900 million, that's like a lot of money, right? And even, so just think, let me put it like sort of in another way. So, research grants these days are not particularly big, right? So a $250,000, $300,000, $500,000 research grant from, say, NSF, that's a pretty big grant, right? So just think about how many research grants could be funded with that road for Pluie, right? So that's what you have to think about at that level, at the White House level. Okay, so the next one is equity. Okay, so what were some equity issues? This is about the fairness of the policy.
They were saying that ranchers would be disproportionately, negatively affected by this policy, favoring the wolves over people.
That is correct. Plus her cat. Now, I really did not, I've been using this video for eons and eons and eons, right? And it wasn't until I moved here to Pennsylvania and I found, hey, people send out coyote warnings. Why? Because they're worried that a coyote is going to take their little puppy dog. And I'm thinking, oh, here's my little puppy dog. Let's see. Anybody see her? Yes. Okay. I don't want her carried off by a coyote. Right? So that's it. Okay. And then we have ease of political acceptability. Okay. Anybody on that one? Who's going to, I know we already talked about the ranchers. Okay. But I want you also to think about other things, other entities.
I mean, I would say with the cost, like that is one thing that has to do with the accessibility, and it's definitely not within reason.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I think that's a good point. And then also, wolves don't vote, right? Okay, and even among the conservation crowd, okay, only so many of them are going to say, out of our priorities, if I'm an environmental organization, a conservation organization, how many of them are going to think that we should spend $900 million on just one animal? Right? So I'm not sure how much support you would get, even among people who care about these issues. Okay, so here's the deal. This is based on a real proposal that was before the White House during the Clinton years, and that's how they developed this episode. I did not know this until recently, that this was, somebody really did make this pitch to the White House. Now, what is interesting is that there's a AAAS meeting in Seattle just before the pandemic began, and I went to visit my cousin who married a Canadian who lives in Calgary, and we were driving to Banff, okay, which is like this big mountain thing. And what was amazing to me is that it was this big superhighway going through the middle of this big national forest, right? And I asked her, like, what are these things that are above the freeway? I was trying to figure them out because, again, it's wilderness on both sides, right? I thought, who in the world would be using it? And guess what it was? It was a wildlife corridor. Like about every mile or so, they had wildlife corridors all the way between Calgary and Banff so that animals could cross. So somebody somewhere in Canada made a good enough case, a good enough 4E case, that they actually did construct these wildlife corridors when they decided to build this freeway through the middle of Canada. I was so shocked. Yes. Oh, yeah. I will be. I saw somebody saying that they'll be at the. Oh, well, that's very interesting. That wildlife corridors are frequent in the West. I did not know that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. I would say, I will be at the AAAS meeting in Denver in a couple weeks. So I'm doing a workshop on equity analysis. So I'll give that as a little advertisement if anybody happens to be there. Okay. So let's go to our exercise here. So now that we've learned about the 4Es, I'm going to talk about the 4Es for our 2 case studies. Okay, so this is retention or remediation, 3rd grade reading standards in Indiana. You might remember that was the topic. This is the science for policy topic. Okay, and so I go to our friend ChatGPT, sorry, obviously I'm tired. And I ask it for pros and cons for each of these 4Es. So this one, retention policies can ensure students have mastered essential reading skills before advancing. But the con, remediation without retention may not be effective if students continue to be socially promoted without meeting literary benchmarks, leading to compounded educational deficits. Here's efficiency. It's targeted support without the need to repeat an entire school year, but it could be considered to be an inefficient use of educational resources as it requires students to repeat an entire grade, which might not be necessary for all areas of learning. Equity. Remediation can be tailored to meet the individual needs of each student, which can help close the achievement gap, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, but retention policies may disproportionately affect students of color and low-income students, exacerbating educational equities. And then ease of political acceptability. The retention policies can be politically unpopular, or can be politically popular as they hold schools accountable for student learning. But remediation requires ongoing funding and resources that can be a harder sell, particularly when there's budget constraints or when effectiveness of the programs is questioned. So then what we do is we take all this information and then we create a 30-second pitch. And so this one is in Indiana. We face a critical decision, retention or remediation. And then we have here, you'll see I put little things here, bluff, bottom line up front. And by the way, when I asked ChatGPT about this, they never do bottom line up front. They always put it at the end and I always have to move it up. So just as a little hint there. So We advocate for a balanced approach that values early intervention, equitable resource distribution, and flexible policies that adapt to each child's needs, ensuring each student in Indiana has a foundation for success. While retention ensures students meet literacy standards before advancing, remediation offers targeted, efficient support without repeating a year. So that covers sort of effectiveness and efficiency. Though retention may seem efficient, it risks widening educational inequities, affecting low-income and minority students disproportionately. Remediation, while needing ongoing investment, provides personalized support, aiming for an inclusive educational landscape. So I think that's a pretty good 30-second pitch. What do you guys think? You know, something to start a conversation with, right? That's the only really goal of a 30-second pitch, is to start a conversation. And then you say, oh, any thoughts about that? Okay, so now we're going to go to the policy for science version. Data-driven literacy, how research could shape Indiana's educational future. So effectiveness, we're looking at utilizing research to inform literacy strategies could lead to more effective teaching methodologies, improving student reading outcomes. But the con is that research findings may not be universally applicable across diverse school settings, potentially leading to effectiveness issues when implemented broadly, right? I think that's a pretty good con, right? I mean, it kind of makes you think. For efficiency, data-driven approaches can streamline literacy education, ensuring that resources are focused where they are most needed and likely to have impact. The con is that the process of collecting, analyzing, and implementing research findings can be time-consuming and may divert attention and resources from immediate teaching needs. And I will add, it is expensive to do good data quality, to do good data research. For equity, a research-based approach to literacy could help identify and close gaps in student achievement, leading to more equitable education system. But then there's a risk that data-driven literacy programs may not adequately address the unique needs of all student populations, particularly if research data is not representative of all demographics. So this you can kind of think about as, you know, there's always something in a research paper that says, you know, like this study does not include this, that, and other thing. That's kind of like what this is. Okay, and then last, ease of political acceptability. The promise of improved educational outcomes based on solid research can garner bipartisan support, easing political hurdles, but there may be political resistance to changing established literacy programs, especially if new research contradicts current practices or requires significant investment. And over the years, you know, there's been so many. There's been like new math. There's been like what was that? The STEM education standards. There's been so many over the years, right? So you can see how that might be an issue. Okay, so here's the 30-second pitch here. In Indiana, we're on the brink of revolutionizing education through data-driven literacy. Research can pinpoint the most effective teaching methods, ensuring every child succeeds in reading. This focused approach promises not only to bridge achievement gaps, but to overhaul our literacy programs efficiently, investing precisely where impact is greatest. Yet, we must navigate this with care. Research takes time and must reflect our diverse student body to avoid inequities. As we stand at this crossroads, we seek bipartisan support to embed research into practice, transforming our educational landscape for generations to come. Together, we can craft a future where every child in Indiana thrives. Hallelujah. Okay, so what do you think of those 30-second pitches? Now, like I said, if you were doing this, the ChatGPT is only a starting point, right? But sometimes it helps. Also, like it can be really hard to figure out what you can say in about 30 seconds. And like I said, just always keep in mind, it's just a starting point for discussion, trying to capture the person's interest.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So, those kind of presented balanced options, showing the drawbacks of some options for action and options that could be successful.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm trying to think about my research topic in a 30-second policy pitch. It seems like you'd have to kind of figure out a goal of that policy pitch, but are you saying that the policy pitch should always kind of present a balanced analysis of different options to kind of like start a conversation with someone, or is there any reality that the policy pitch ends up kind of advocating for something specific, or like, or is that something different than a policy pitch?
Yeah, no, a policy pitch, I'm teaching you sort of, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, I'm teaching you a balanced policy pitch.
Okay.
I think balanced policy pitches, even if you're doing advocacy, will increase your credibility, right? Because otherwise it can make you look naive, that you don't understand the challenges of what's going on, right? So personally, I think it's better to do a balanced policy pitch. So, you know, they don't think, oh, here's this naive young person coming to it, and they know nothing about public policy and how policy works. Instead, it's better to acknowledge that there are challenges in every policy. No policy is ever perfect. And this is how you are addressing those concerns. So, but, you know, you can definitely do advocacy. And with advocacy, what would happen is that you would only do the pros and not the cons. Now, like right here where I have the ChatGPT prompts here, I have here, develop a pro con of these, the 4 E's of acceptability. Now, the reason it's written that way is because when I first said, develop a 30-second pitch, right, the next one says develop a 30-second pitch based on the above, incorporating both pros and cons. When I just asked ChatGPT to develop a 30-second pitch, it only did the pros. ChatGPT tends to be very positive about everything, right? And so that's why, you know, it can be somewhat challenging to use because it doesn't do the negatives unless you tell it to do the negatives. So if you just said develop a 30-second pitch, it will give you a 30-second advocacy pitch. But what I'm teaching here is a 30-second neutral pitch, right? You can do whatever you want in whatever situation that you are in, right? So the only thing, like I said, is just keep in mind that at least you need to know the answers to the cons. You need to know what the cons are and have a response to the cons because they will undoubtedly come up during a conversation. And that's why I think I talked about earlier about doing like opposition research, right? You need to know what people are saying about your policy or your research or whatever it is. Okay, any other questions? Okay. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and have you go into your breakout rooms again, assuming that is acceptable. I'm not sure how well the breakout rooms work last time, but assuming it is, or if you think it's going to be too challenging, I can just answer questions for the next 15 minutes or so. But I see people disappearing, so it looks like they're going off to their rooms. Okay, so we have a bit of time for questions, and I'm willing to stay over to answer any remaining questions that people have, if need be. I will go, let me see. Oh yeah, I'm going to go here just as sort of my final thing here, just because I do want to advertise my book. So if you sign up for my newsletter, which comes out, supposed to come out every month, you know, I'm lucky if I make it every 2 months. Then you'll hear about other classes and things like that that I offer. Oftentimes I will be doing them for free from your perspective because I'm being paid for by some organization to do them. Like I said, I talk to people at all different levels. I'm doing a lot of professionals these days for people in state and local government, or like I was talking about the people in Canada, so forth. If you get on my mailing list, and I'll tell you about anything that's an open, like the sponsor is willing to have anybody attend. And I usually have a fair number of those. If you could follow me on Twitter at SciTech Policy, you'll hear about these workshops, again, if they're open. But I also put in there employment opportunities that are in science technology policy. And I primarily focus on science for policy jobs. Now, there's also something called SciPol jobs, where you can also look for science policy jobs. They tend to more focus on jobs in DC and that are policy for science versus science for policy. So because I know so many people, I get a lot of job announcements, and I have them on LinkedIn. You're also welcome to follow me on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn, I find, is rather erratic in terms of what it is that you do. And so therefore, I also try to cross-post them on Twitter. I just got my social media person back, and I will try to spread beyond that, but that's all I can handle when it's just me. This is my book. This is From Expertise to Impact, a practical guide to informing and influencing science technology policy. My goal is to make this as inexpensive as possible. So sometime when it comes out, like in February, as sort of a pre-print kind of thing, I'll be able to make it free. And then with Amazon, I'll be able to sporadically make it free for like 5 days or so. For like the Kindle version. So be sure to sign up for my newsletter if you're interested in getting that. It gives a lot more in depth on the stuff that I've talked about today in terms of policy analysis. So I end on time. I will end with that. But like I said, I am quite willing, despite the fact that I'm having a hard time talking after talking all day, to answer any questions that you guys have.
Thank you so much, Debbie. And if you have questions, obviously stay here. People who are leaving, thank you so much for joining, and stay involved in science policy. You can do that at Indiana Science Communication Day coming up. If you're planning on joining, that's great. But yeah, let's open for questions.
Okay, great. So I see Emily, first question.
Sorry, I keep having questions. I was wondering if you could talk about like how do you utilize visual cues? So like say you're giving this policy pitch, or like either at SciComm Day or like in a conference, you're just giving a pitch, like because the pitch is not vague, but more broad and like touching a lot of categories. Are you like saying here on my posters where I'm talking about this, or are you just like giving this and then drawing them in, and maybe your poster doesn't follow the same outline?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yes, you do have to adapt. So even though I'm talking about this as a 30-second policy pitch, the reality is if depending on the situation, it might be more of a conversation, right? So you go and you talk to somebody and they say, well, what is it that that you're doing? And you say, oh, what's your research topic?
Infectious disease control.
Oh, so you work on infectious disease control. Like what part of infectious disease? And you say
environmental facing control, environmental changes for control.
Environmental changes for control. I have no idea what that means. Can you explain a bit further?
We might be changing habitats for mosquito-borne diseases to reduce mosquito populations or something of that kind.
Well, I hate mosquitoes. So anything that will help kill off those mosquitoes is a good deal for me. How are you going to save my backyard so I can sit outside and read my books in the summer? Okay. So what you want to do is, and this is also related for people for whom you have, say, disagreements or whatever, you don't think, okay, don't focus on what you don't have in common. Focus on what you do have in common. You know how like when you're sitting outside in the summer and you just really want to enjoy the sun, but those mosquitoes are just coming to kill you off. do you have that problem? And they say, oh yeah, I do. So yeah, well, I'm doing research that'll help focus on that issue. Okay. I don't know if I'm anything close to what it is you're talking about, but hopefully you get the drift,
I
right?
get, yeah. I drifted us further from my research by saying mosquitoes because I panicked. So
Okay. Okay. Yeah. But this is good. This is why it's good to practice, right? Because, you can just have just a normal conversation like this, right? And it doesn't matter who they are. It can be, a parent, it can be a friend, it can be the taxi driver, or like I should say, these days, Uber driver, you know, um, you know, the more you practice, the better that you will get. Yeah. And you can just do it amongst each other. Just try to do people from different fields, right? So that's nice when you have a big group like this. Don't try to do somebody who also works on whatever the heck it is that you work on. That will also help. Okay, next question, Shavika. Am I close?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. My question, it's not a question. I want to have your insights. What kind of terminology to use when it comes to climate change? Because I see many people are skeptical and also had some reservations about the term itself and might show some reluctance if I say, oh, I'm working in the field of climate change. So what are your some insights, suggestion? Should I change the terminology and use more neutral weather variability, environmental change over the long period of time?
Yes.
Something like.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a good question. And that relates to what I was saying before. So you answer the question quite well yourself. You talk about weather variability. Okay. People care about weather variability, right? So sure, ultimately, you're hoping to help on issues related to climate change. But if you start talking about the weather, well, everybody cares about the weather, right? That's something people have in common, and always look for what that common issue is. You ask the person, well, what is it you do? Well, I'm a farmer. I'm somebody who loves, I love to go fishing. I love to do, whatever it is. And you might have to avoid what's called the C word in some administrations, okay? But it doesn't mean you can't have a very interesting conversation. So one of the things, this is like what like I said, I've been working on climate change since I was like your guys' age. That's how long I've been working on this issue. One of the things that irritates me the most is that climate change scientists, they tend to focus on the extremes, right? And so they'll talk about sea level rise and this, and the other thing, and sort of the heat. And so they make people think that people in certain parts of the country don't have to worry about climate change, right? Because why should I care about those crazy people in Florida? They're like wacky anyhow. So they have sea level rise, they're gonna, like bad things are gonna happen. Those are rich people anyhow who are living on the coast, right? Okay, this is not an illogical thing. Why should I care about something? Why? Because it affects you. But those crazy climate scientists, they feel that they have to focus on the extremes. Okay. And by focusing on the extremes and not focusing on what happens in other parts of the country, they make people think it's not their problem. But I did a study called The Waters of West Virginia. And one of the things that I learned as part of the study is that extreme rain conditions, which happen all over the Midwest, right, where you get too much rain too fast all at once, can lead to a lot of problems, including flooding, things that kill people, right? There just a couple of years ago that almost 100 people died in West Virginia because of flooding. And you hear about this in Kentucky, you hear about this, throughout Appalachia, which is kind of the area that I'm in. And the problem, and I will do this, by the way, I will go on webinars on climate change. And when they only talk about the coast, which is very frequent, I will say, what about the people in the Midwest? Don't they have to worry about climate change too? And the scientists will always say, oh, yes, they do have to worry about it as well. Okay, well, then why don't you include it in your presentation? Because that is the problem. They're not thinking about the fuller audience. They're only thinking about a portion of the audience. It's getting a little bit better, but it's not as good as it should be. There was actually somebody, I did a workshop a couple of years ago at AAAS, and I had somebody from Purdue, and they were running a climate change center, and they were really doing stuff in the Midwest. So there are bits and pieces of people out there doing it, but not everybody. But yeah, focus on that. Don't say I'm working on climate change, because they may or may not care about climate change, but they do care about weather. Okay, any other questions? Okay, last call. Okay, well, oh, we got one here. Andrew.
This is, since like there's no other questions, this is kind of unrelated, but you said you worked at the CRS, right?
Right.
I just wanted to like, did you enjoy the experience? Would you recommend it to people looking for like that type of career, like as a work environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's not for everybody, right? But they do hire younger people, and I have had several students who have gone on to work with them. Yeah, so I think that the most, because they were like an older workforce, and they're really trying to bring in like kind of the new generation. And about, I can't remember the division that I used to work for a couple of years ago. They were hiring like 5 people or something like that, which is a lot. Like when I was there, the person I replaced had been there like for 20 something years, right? And I had planned to stay there a long time myself, and then I got this offer from the White House, and I felt I like couldn't turn it down, right? It wasn't like I applied for it or something like that. The thing is that what you do at CRS is you basically sit in literally like a cubicle and you write all day long, right? Now, I'm somebody who loves to write, and everything's in my head, and these are things that I like to do, right? But for some people, that it would be torture, right? They want to go out, they want to meet people, things like that. But literally, you know, if I left my desk, just imagine, because the Congressional Research Service is under the Library of Congress, right? And just like you wouldn't let a librarian just like wander off because you wanted to go to a meeting because somebody had to be there to answer the phones for the reference desk, that is what the Congressional Research Service is like. Okay, because at any point there could be a hearing happening, and literally you will get people who are who their member is sitting there, says, I would like to ask a question about such and such. Can you get some details for me? And they pass it to their staffer. The staffer then called me, and they would ask me this question, and then I would have to, you know, come up with a response, right? So so they don't like you to kind of leave your desk for that reason, because when Congress is in session, it's hard. Now, when Congress is not in session, it's you know, there's a little more flexibility. But even still, I was the busiest when Congress was out of session, because that's when the staffers did their research and did their work, and they wanted me to do things for them or do briefings, because that's when they had the time, because when the session was over, you know, they were super busy. So I think it's definitely like a great, you know, place to work. I learned a lot, even though I'd already been in DC for like 20 years. When I went to the Congressional Research Service, I learned a lot. And so it was really good. But it's also really good to have a little bit of experience, you know, because of course they're very competitive positions. So one thing you might want to look at are the Presidential Management Fellowship programs. You know, you know, sort of the other fellowship programs where you can kind of get a little bit of kind of government experience in what it is that you do. I applied actually for the Congressional Research Service, I think, right when I came to DC. And now that I look back at it, I didn't have a chance of getting the job. But like I said, I definitely have had like students, like some who like were somebody mentioned the MOST program earlier, that they were in Missouri, they had gotten like just a year of state fellowship experience doing agriculture kinds of stuff. There was an opening for an agriculture person, and they were glad to have somebody from that part of the country, right? To do the position. So it's a lot of the policy positions are kind of a roll of the dice, where what you are interested in your skill base matches what it is that they need. And you can be perfectly good, but if you don't have a match, then it doesn't make any sense. And they don't really have openings. In the past, they didn't have very many openings at CRS, but then I guess Congress decided to increase their funding in terms of doing stuff. So that
Thank
help?
you
Sure. Okay.
very much.